In early 2021, Saudi Arabia unveiled a concept that challenged every established rule of urban planning. They proposed a total reimagining of human civilization, a carbon-neutral, hyper-connected community built from scratch in the middle of a barren desert. The dimensions were staggering. This 3D diagram shows the Empire State Building stacked inside a footprint just 200 meters wide. Now, extrude that structure into a continuous mirrored wall, 500 meters tall, stretching dead straight for 170 kilometers. It was designed to house 9 million people inside a single, impossibly thin corridor. This wasn't just a design exercise. In 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced Vision 2030, a strategic framework built to pivot the kingdom's economy away from its total reliance on oil toward global tourism and technological innovation. The necessity of that shift was rooted in the numbers. Currently, oil provides about 75% of all Saudi government revenue. But it's a finite, volatile resource, and a massive budget deficit in 2015 proved that the kingdom could no longer rely on high oil prices to pay its bills. The line was the centerpiece of this transformation. It was a multi-billion-dollar gamble for a nation's post-oil survival, intended to prove that Saudi Arabia could build a future that the rest of the world hadn't even imagined yet. Despite the skepticism of urban planners, the kingdom moved fast. Massive excavators moved into the Tabuk Desert, tearing a deep, perfectly straight trench through the rock and sand to prove the project was more than just a digital concept. But by early 2024, the momentum stopped. This map animation tracks the planned 170-kilometer route, which suddenly shrank by over 98%. Official targets for 2030 were quietly reduced from a massive megacity to a tiny fragment just 2.4 kilometers long. The fallout on site was immediate. Thousands of workers were sent home, massive tunneling contracts were canceled, and the desert site fell silent. The sudden retreat revealed a gap between the digital renders and the physical world that even $500 billion couldn't close. To understand why the machine stopped, we have to look at the impossible demands the design made on the Earth's resources. The first physical barrier was the most visible part of the project. The iconic mirrored glass facade meant to encase the entire 170-kilometer structure. Covering the structure requires 170 million square meters of perfectly engineered glass. Compared to the Moriah Concert Hall, the world record holder, Moriah is a single tiny pixel. The line needs 17,000 times more glass. Fabricating it would consume the entire annual output of the world's largest supplier for 2 centuries. The steel requirements were just as astronomical. Foundation work alone was estimated to consume 20% of the world's annual steel production, roughly 60 Eiffel Towers worth of steel for every single kilometer of the city. Then there is the water paradox. 9 million people in a desert need billions of liters for drinking and cooling, which can only come from industrial-scale desalination. But that process is so energy-intensive it would destroy the city's promise of a zero-carbon, renewable energy system. Even with unlimited capital, the timeline was impossible. The Earth simply could not supply the physical materials fast enough to build a city this size in less than a decade. The city's geometry was a systemic flaw. Traditional cities grow in overlapping networks. The line restricts organic sprawl into one rigid axis. Compressing 9 million people here creates a bottlenecked nightmare. You'd need a high-speed rail carrying more daily passengers than the New York and Tokyo subways combined, using unproven technology. This creates a dangerous single point of failure. If a rail track breaks or a main water pipe bursts at kilometer 80, the entire city is cut in half. There is no way to route around the problem because there is no other path. This is why urban sprawl, though often criticized, is actually a sign of a healthy city. Functional urban centers require organic redundancy and overlapping routes to absorb the failures that a single straight line cannot. While the public was told the city would cost $500 billion, an internal audit uncovered by financial journalists painted a much bleaker picture of the project's bankability. The original $500 billion estimate is dwarfed by a projected true cost of $8.8 trillion, pushing completion to 2080. To contextualize, this column divides into 8 blocks. Each represents a full year of Saudi Arabia's entire national economic output. The line would cost 8 times its annual GDP. Internal reports suggest a culture of silence kept these facts from leadership. Executives allegedly inflated future tourism revenues and hotel rates to hide the massive losses, removing any project managers who questioned the math or voiced dissent. The project survived its early years not through engineering breakthroughs, but through a deliberate manipulation of numbers to satisfy an impossible ambition. Eventually, the funding began to dry up. As oil prices stayed below the kingdom's break-even point, the Sovereign Wealth Fund was forced to make deep budget cuts. This derailed companion projects like the Sindalah luxury island, which hosted a celebrity launch party but remains closed to the public and largely isolated. Behind the spreadsheets is a brutal human reality. Thousands of migrant laborers were brought to the desert for wages they desperately needed, only to work in undisclosed conditions that eventually drew international scrutiny. There was also the cost to the local community. The indigenous Hawaiitat tribe, who had lived in the region for generations, were forcibly displaced from their villages to clear a path for a city that may now never be finished. Today, the Tabuk Desert is returning to its natural state. After $50 billion in spending, all that remains of the 170-kilometer vision is a small trench, some concrete piles, and a collection of quiet cranes standing over a site that the world has already begun to move past. The desert eventually answered the question the world asked in 2021. Real cities aren't decreed by renders. They grow through the needs of the people who live in them. Without that organic history, the line remains little more than a $50 billion scar in the sand.